Good evening, everybody. I'm James Heimowitz. I'm president of China Institute, and it's just a delight to welcome all of you here this evening for what promises to be a really special evening and a real treat. For those of you that don't know China Institute, we were founded in 1926 with a mission to help Americans better understand China through its language, through its culture, through its history, through its business practices. And in our nearly 100 years, we've touched nearly 1 million people who've come and seen our art exhibits at our gallery, who've studied Chinese with us, who've been on tours to China with us. And tonight's a really special night. We're pulling together something that's sort of like a core tenet of Chinese culture. I was just telling our panelists, I lived in China for 33 years and feel very bicultural. But if we're going to have a better world, if we're going to live in a better world, I think it's so imperative that we're in a world that understands each other's cultures better. And I can't think of any group of people that we've assembled this evening who are in a better place to help us sort of understand each other's culture than China Institute's advisor, David Henry Hwang, then Professor Bright Sheng, and Professor Ann Lin, who are going to be in discussion about this really exciting new opera, a new take and a new rendition on a very important classic work. So you didn't come here to listen to me, but I just wanted to say a few words of welcome to all of you and to introduce Ann Lin, the director of the Lieberthal-Rogel Center at the University of Michigan, who's going to do a little bit more of an introduction. Not that they need it, everybody knows David Henry Hwang and Bright Sheng, but she's going to do justice to their background. But a special thanks to Anne, thank you, to Carol Stepanchik, and to really everybody at the LRCCS who've collaborated with us to bring this program to fruition this evening. So thanks, everyone. We're in for a special treat. Let me hand it over to Anne.
James, thank you so much for that introduction. On behalf of the Lieberthal-Rogel Center for Chinese Studies at the University of Michigan, our thanks to the China Institute for this wonderful opportunity to collaborate. I think we've really done some wonderful things together through the pandemic. And so special thanks today also to Carol Stepanchuk and to Aaron Nicholson for really doing all of the groundwork to make this happen. So I'm delighted to be here tonight to facilitate a conversation between two wonderful artists and collaborators, Bright Sheng and David Henry Hwang. Bright Sheng is the Leonard Bernstein Distinguished University Professor of Composition at the University of Michigan. His compositions, accolades, and awards are too many to mention. So here I will only mention that his latest work, Rages of Love, for violin and chamber orchestra, will premiere at the Merkin Concert Hall in New York City on May 2nd, in honor of the centennial celebration of the Fontainebleau Schools of Music and Fine Arts. David Henry Hwang is Associate Professor of Theater at the Columbia University School of Arts. His theater projects include plays, musicals, libretti, screenplays, television series, and even the lyrics for a song by the artist formerly known as Prince. On May 1st, he will be inducted onto the Playwrights Sidewalk in front of the Lucille Lortel Theater by the Off-Broadway League. Now, these feel like completely inadequate introductions, but the problem is that if I started to name all of the work that Bright and David have done and all the awards they've been given, we wouldn't have any time today for the discussion. And we are here to have a discussion about one of their joint projects, the opera Dream of the Red Chamber. Dream of the Red Chamber returns to the San Francisco Opera this summer, June 14th through July 3rd. David and Bright co-wrote the libretto, and Bright composed the music. And here I also want to credit Stan Lai, the director, and Tim Yip for production design. Dream of the Red Chamber first premiered at the San Francisco Opera in 2016, then at the Hong Kong Arts Festival in 2017, and then traveled afterwards to Beijing, to Changsha, and to Wuhan. So I'm going to start off the discussion today, but I very much hope that all of you listening will be part of it. So please go ahead and put your questions into the Q&A box, and you can do that at any time. I'll try to keep an eye on what's going up there and feed them into the discussion that we're going to have. So Bright and David, welcome, congratulations, and thanks so much for having this conversation with us today.
Thank you.
So I want to start by just reminding everybody, I'm sure people know, Dream of the Red Chamber, Hong Lou Meng in Chinese, is an epic Chinese novel written in the 18th century by Cao Xueqing. It's a story of the fortunes of an aristocratic family, but it's also a portrait of a society and a dynasty, a treasure house of cultural practices, and a meditation on success, failure, and enlightenment. Bright, you, like generations of Chinese, encountered the novel first as a teenager. Can you talk about what attracted you to the novel first as a young man, and then maybe how your appreciation of it has changed over the years? And Bright, you might be muted. I can't hear you. Bright, I think you're still muted.
Thank you, Anne. So I first encountered the novel during the Cultural Revolution, the second half of the Cultural Revolution. The novel was somehow allowed to be read because Mao said it's a good novel to study the feudalism, the corruption of the feudalism. So we somehow got a copy. I was totally absorbed by the story and admiring Bao Yu, the female lead and the male lead, that in the story that was surrounded by beautiful young girls and living this luxury life. And I thought, oh, what a life. You know, first time I was around the same age, 13 or 14, I read it. And most of the literary stuff, that other things that I kind of skipped around. But for some reason, I always felt an affinity to this novel. I kept reading it. When I came to the United States 40 years ago, and I brought a copy, and I still have that copy, and I kept reading it. So as a composer, we're always looking for projects, and I must say, I did think about it. I said, maybe one day this could be an opera. But then I thought that's impossible. It's just too long and too many characters. And to do an opera effectively, it's next to impossible. So I got kind of let it sit. And then San Francisco Opera, David Gockley, who was the general manager at the time, and asked me, so what do you think of this as an opera project? I was cautious, and I said to him, I said, it could be done, and it's also a great chance to showcase the Chinese aristocratic lifestyle of the 18th century. But I said, one has to be really cautious about how to handle this project.
And so it really wasn't, it was David's idea. It wasn't your idea to take Dream of the Red Chamber and make it into a novel.
The project came from a foundation in Minnesota called the Chinese Heritage Foundation. And these are a lot of old immigrants in the past from Hong Kong, and they are passionate about Chinese culture. And so their mission was to promote Chinese culture in the Western world. That's why they thought of commissioning an opera, and they wanted to be written in English, so the Western audience could understand it. So but they approached the San Francisco Opera, and David Gockley approached them, say, okay, so what do you think about a team of Bright and David Hwang, the two of them, and as a starting. Because normally when you start a commissioning an opera, the first thing you do is you have a subject, and then you have a composer, and then you find a partner librettist, and then from there you go into a director, set designer, and so forth. But I think I was lucky, so I immediately thought David, because I enjoyed working with him. I thought he was the most brilliant writer that I have worked with, and so I approached David.
So, David, I was born in the U.S., and my parents actually, when I was a teenager, suggested that I read Dream of the Red Chamber, and I just sort of rolled my eyes and like, oh my God, my parents, right? So I finally read it in a college literature course. Was Bright's suggestion that you write the libretto the first time you encountered Dream of the Red Chamber?
I mean, of course, I'd heard of it, but I'd never read it, and I, like you, was born in the States, but unlike you, didn't learn to read or, speak Chinese. And so, I mean, I took a couple semesters of it in college, but really, for all intents and purposes, I can't speak. So Bright approached me with this idea, and I said no. Like I turned him down several times because I hadn't read the book. It seemed really long, and I felt like, oh, this is first, it's a huge work. How are we going to do this? And second of all, I knew enough to know that this is an incredibly revered work. And, there were two television series adaptations of it in China. And they always inspired great controversy. So it just seemed to me, we're just asking for trouble if we try to do this. So I turned him down a couple of times. And then I like to say that, Bright, as he mentioned, grew up during the Cultural Revolution. So his will is stronger than mine because I grew up in LA. So Bright eventually talked me into it. I think actually I was in Hong Kong doing a play of mine at the Hong Kong Arts Festival. I get a call from Bright, and at this time turned down 3 or 4 times, and he finally convinced me to do it. And of course, he was right. One of the things he said to me was, at some point in your life, you have to read this book. And I was like, okay. And it, has turned out to be a wonderful collaboration, and particularly the fact that we were able to tour it to China, which Bright can tell you more about later in our conversation, is extremely moving to me.
So that's really interesting. I mean, when I think about your different, theater work, I don't really think of your motivation as, oh, I'm going to introduce Americans to Chinese culture. So how did you sort of orient yourself to what you were doing?
I mean, no, I mean, the primary thing that I do that I can do in my own work is not, as you say, try to translate Chinese work for a Western audience. On the other hand, I've been doing this for, 30, 40 years. And it seemed like, oh, that's something that might be interesting for me to try as a way to learn more about this culture that I've been trying to learn about my whole life. Sorry. So yeah, it's a different kind of challenge than I usually set for myself, but very satisfying.
I can imagine, absolutely. We've got a great question from the audience, and so they're asking if you remember what English translation you worked from, or were there many translations that you tried to look at as you put this together?
I was going to, because I knew we were going to have this discussion, I was going to go to my shelf and pull it down, and I didn't. And Bright, what translation did I use?
Okay, so there are 2 complete translations. There are many abridged versions. There are two complete translations. One is by a Chinese scholar, but I think a British, David Hwang. Did I get right? I think. I didn't check it either, but from the memory.
David, I think that's right.
Yeah, David Hwang.
It's been a few years.
Translated a long time ago in the last century, the middle of last century. And the first 80 chapters, we know the first, the novel officially has 120 chapters. The first 80 is, the consensus is written by Cao Xueqing. The last 40 were not. Someone else finished it. Apparently, it's obvious when you read through in Chinese, you see the language changes, the style changes, and it's totally different. And many scholars believe the intention for the ending of the story of the novel, it was embedded in the first part, foreshadowed throughout the first 80 chapters, was not reflected correctly. It was deliberately altered for some political reason or some other reasons. So the ending is quite different. So the first 80 chapters were translated by David Hwang, and then the last 40 was translated by his son-in-law. I don't remember his name, Anthony something, I think, and he translated. So that was the one most Westerners acquainted with, and then there is after the Cultural Revolution, I think late 1970s or early 80s, there is a Chinese translation by two scholars, Chinese, that translated more literal. If you read it, it's more word to word, and they selected the best edition. As you know, there are many versions of, even in the Chinese, the versions we have historically, and quite different. There's some people that it was hand copied. So when hand copied, and people change and this and that, but in the 1970s, late 70s and early 80s, there's another version. I don't remember their name as well, but that version is more literal. So I think what we did is used both, but based mostly on the first version, which I think most people consider more poetic, get the kind of a poetic element of the original novel.
Yeah, I just, because we're on Zoom and I can go on the web, I just looked it up, and it is David Hawkes and John Minford. So maybe John Minford was his son-in-law. Mm-hmm. And it's, for those of you who don't know, when I talked about the novel being long, it's twice as long as War and Peace. It has 500 odd characters. And in this David Hawkes version, it exists in 5 volumes.
So we have these amazing Q&A participants in the webinar, and one of them is our own David Ralston, also from the University of Michigan. And so all of the names and the different translations are in the Q&A box if people want to look for them themselves. So I love the comparison to War and Peace. And when we were talking about this earlier today, Bright, you brought this up. It's a massive masterpiece, obviously. Why is the comparison to War and Peace useful to you, or how was it useful to you as you started to think about how you might transform Dream of the Red Chamber into an opera?
Well, there is an opera version of War and Peace written by Prokofiev, who is a very prolific composer, as well as experienced opera composer. He had written many operas prior to his approach to War and Peace, and also War and Peace has the same kind of a stature in Russian literature. It's a national treasure, and it's highly revered as one of the most astounding achievement. So I think he had this vision to write this grand opera, end up with almost 6 hours long, 2 evenings. And the problem, I think, in that opera, as I see it, is in the novel, there is a love line, the story. The love story is a sideline. It's not important, but as a novel, there has that piece. So of course, when you write an opera, you beef up the love story. And then he ended up having 2 stories in the opera, and people were very confused. I saw it twice. And I was confused, and I was convinced if we do Dream of the Red Chamber, we would not fall into the same trap, because Dream of the Red Chamber, as you know, is not only about the love story, but there are other political stories and all kind of interpretations of it. But I was convinced that we want to have one main story only. And so what our basic approach is, we take the love triangle essentially between Bao Yu, Dai Yu, and Bao Cai, the three protagonists. Use that as the main story, but all the other part of the story is a sub-story, subplot. That subplot explains why this tragic ending of the novel and of the opera. But also because of the fact that in an opera you only have 2.5 hours of music, right? So and if you read normally, if you read a libretto of an opera, if you read it as a play, maybe it's a half an hour play at the most. So if you think about that, you reduce that novel into a half an hour play. How do you make it effectively? Because in opera, the music's supposed to tell the words that, it's not like a Shakespeare's words, there's on and on. So you need to establish these characters. The music's supposed to do that job. But the story has to be very simplified and straightforward, very dramatic. So we took some stories and we changed some plot that according to what we think needed for the plot, for the drama. And then we took some stories from Cao Xueqing's family life, because as we know that the novel is autobiographic. So we took some of that and we made that into part of the story. And I think what made an opera work, or any opera works, is that the story has to be very clear, and the music and the words and the drama should be married seamlessly. And then people are completely absorbed into the story, into the drama. And I think that was our goal. I remember talking to David. I said, I don't care if we were faithful to the novel, but we first and foremost want a great opera and touching.
You want a story. You want people to be engaged in the story.
I remember. I don't know if you remember, David. I said I want at least one person cry every night when we do the opera.
I don't remember that specifically, but I know that your priority was to create something that's going to work as theater, that was going to work as opera, which of course I would want as well. And when I sort of tell the story about Bright persuading me to work on it, part of what made me say yes, finally, was that Bright did have a vision about how to tell the story and how to boil it down to the essential love triangle, which is why we share credit for the libretto, because as Bright says, there aren't that many words in a libretto. They have to be the right words, but quantity-wise, they shouldn't be. It should be very economical, because it takes much longer to sing "I love you" than to say "I love you." So you want a play to be economical, but you want an opera libretto to be that much more succinct. And the other, at least half of the job, is structure. How do you tell the story? What scenes follow upon each other? And because Bright had a very strong notion about how to do that, that's half the work. So that's why we share credit.
Well, David was very, very generous. I basically worked as his research assistant, gathered the materials for him to read, the sections that's important for him to read. But I must say that at the dress rehearsal, David came. He made a compliment to my words. He said to my music. He said, you changed the mood right away. Different people change the mood in the opera. Well, I said that's because the words are so good. And Dave, as again, for opera, because the character only have very few lines, a very short chance to present herself or himself. So, but David managed to use just a few sentences. You immediately get to the core of this character. And that is incredible, I must say. That's incredible, more than talent, craftsmanship, whatever. So I try to match that in music as well. I think a great composers like a Verdi, even Puccini, that they have the musical characterization. The same thing with the words. We never talked about this, David, but I think it's the same thing, that you develop that idea, you establish the persona of these people, these characters, that right away, as soon as they appear, and you know what kind of a person it is, just with the music before they open their mouth. So that kind of is important. You know, one of the things I always feel very kind of disappointed, you know, some of the musicals that everybody sings the same tune. You know, you the villain, you the young girl, man, woman, they all sing the same tune, and beautiful tune. But I think a great thing about drama is, just like a theater, the characters that needs to be different. That's what makes the theater interesting, and so is the music, should be able to establish that.
Well, it won't surprise you, Bright, that a lot of people want to hear about the music and how you put it together. And so let me just, read you a little bit from these different questions. People are asking, what was the process like for you to create the music, and how did you select the styles or genres that you use? One of the things I think that David Gockley said to you was that he wanted a lyrical, harmonically consonant piece with a lot of Chinese folk color. And I'm wondering how you provided that without sort of, dipping into chinoiserie.
Okay, so chinoiserie wasn't a problem. It wasn't any problem, because I'm from China. I grew up with Chinese music, and the my goal is of course opera. You have to showcase the beauty of the voice, and the opera you have to have emotional drama. The range of emotions are high, and also it has to be touching. Again, we want it to be touching. We want to be moving, and those are has a lot to do with the theatrical setup, music setup, and where the most important thing. For example, an aria sings. We all know this Zhang Hua Ci is the petals burial aria that Dai Yu, the female lead, that in the novel was important. Any TV series was also important. So I placed that at the beginning of the second act. Start with her aria. So I think all this is important. Timing, of course, the setup, and but the way I write opera is I study the character, and I decide what kind of character that would be, and then I write the main aria first. So I
wasn't it Dai Yu's opera aria you wrote first, right? Even when we were in Minneapolis, I felt like you were. Is that?
Yeah, I wrote a little thing. Her opening entrance that she sings was when she plays the Qing. But I don't know if you remember this. David finished the first act, but I couldn't write the first act because I had not had an aria from Bao Yu, the male lead. So I asked just to jump ahead to do an aria for Bao Yu, and then I wrote that first. So when I had like a 4 or 5 main character, each would have a different arias, and then I worked from there. Then I can start from beginning and piece together. So I don't do ABCD, I jump around, and aria is very important. But on the other hand, like Lady Wang, who's a very main character in this, as a negative sort of a character who's against the marriage of Bao Yu and Dai Yu. In that case, I also started with her aria, which happened in the scene 3 in in first act, and she was talking about the family burden, financial burden, and all that. She found a solution very important for her to she would be the matriarch, for the family very soon. So, and that aria, which I started first for her character, and the rest of all her character was based on that. And in San Francisco at the premiere, she sang that, and it was fine. And then afterwards, we only had about 6 months before we went to Hong Kong for the second performance. And I thought about it, I just felt we don't really need that aria anymore, because all what she said in the aria was said later, before, after that aria. And her music character is clear. So I felt that becomes a little bit cumbersome to have that. So I cut it. And of course, the singer wasn't very happy, but.
That's really interesting. So I mean, I see what you mean by saying you start with the characterization, because you have these arias and then you sort of build the rest up. And I wonder, David, what does that mean? You are writing the libretto and Bright is putting music to it, or he comes to you and he says, this is how it should sound, and you figure out what it should say?
I mean, so I feel like one of the jobs of a librettist is, of course, to try to create good characters, try to create a story, all that. But also to try and create something that's going to help the composer to do their best work. Because ultimately, an opera is going to rise or fall on the music. Now, the libretto is sort of I think the unsung hero, so to speak, of the opera. But to a large extent, what audiences and critics and everybody are going to mostly be focusing on is the music. And so therefore, it's important for me to figure out with each composer I work with how they work best. And so Bright's already, for instance, told the story about, okay, I did the first act and then I expected him to write something, but he wasn't ready yet. So then I went and created something in the second act that he could write in order to begin establishing the musical language for the character. I don't think that we ever have conversations where Bright's saying, oh, I want the music to be a particular way. I think it's always more about the character. How does he imagine or feel the character? I don't know how that's eventually going to be expressed in music, but if we can reach simpatico about that, then I feel like we have the libretto is the foundation it needs to be, and Bright has the words that he needs to create something that ultimately is going to be satisfying to us both.
So this is a really interesting story about how the production changed, even as you went from San Francisco to Hong Kong. Were there changes that happened when you went to China? And you knew it was going to be a very different audience from San Francisco, but even from Hong Kong. I mean, did the opera change because as you heard it in a different environment, or because of your earlier experience?
Yeah, mostly in opera, I try not to burden David with too much the changes and all that. So I mostly, if I need extra bars, I would just take whatever is available and rewrite. Because sometimes music you need to elaborate more certain ideas and all that. So by the time we get to China, Beijing, which was another 6 months or so, I did another version of change, and I cut a little more, I add somewhere I added a little more, and people have been given, patrons and people from the foundation that commission the work. I always welcome ideas, so I would ask them. I said, "Do you have any ideas to tell me? I'm about to make another version," and I did the same thing for this version as well. So then I look at it and I think about it, and certain things I thought, okay, so maybe I should do if I could do. So we always do. And for this version, I did again. There's something that bothered me in the music that I changed. I hope that works better this time. At the end of the clip that you showed at the end of that, what I found right before that, there was seven main characters all singing at once with the chorus, female chorus at the end, which is a big moment to end the first act. And what I felt, okay, now that's something that the character, the line kind of melt into each other. And I felt, maybe I could start with them don't melt with each other. They more characterized of each of them. So I did some change, and I haven't heard it, so I'm looking forward to hearing it.
So one of the questions from the audience here says, were you writing this opera for a Western tradition audience only? And Prokofiev obviously wrote for an audience that knew War and Peace. Many of the musicals that come from movies, people have already seen the movie, so they have a background to this. But of course, in China, everybody knows Hong Lo Meng. In the West, very few people do. Was that a factor? You've already talked about how you needed to find a love story as really sort of the central hook. But was that a factor in terms of how you staged it or presented it when you went from the US to China?
I mean, in terms of so let's talk about the creation of the work first. In terms of the creation of the work, I think, Bright and I were not, it would have been too much to expect that this work could have been shown in China. And in fact, even more intimidating than my initial reservations about trying to create this. So no, the place that commissioned it was San Francisco Opera. And so we thought we were basically writing for the audience that would attend the show in San Francisco. That said, I don't know that we limited ourselves or tried to go, oh, well, that's something that Western audiences won't understand, so we're not going to put it in. I think we tried to create the best story that we could to reflect the elements of the novel that we decided to use. And then when the show ended up going first to the Hong Kong Arts Festival and then touring China, you would have to ask Bright. I mean, Bright conducted it, so you were there all the time. Stan Lai, Lai Shengchuan is not on this Zoom, or neither is Tim Yip, the designer. But I don't think that they changed stuff, but Bright, you would know.
Well, like David said, originally our objective was mainly to write a good opera that people either knew the story or the novel or don't. They would get affected by it, and they would get involved, touched by it. And that's our first goal. And then, of course, when we went to China, did go to Hong Kong is slightly different. So when Hong Kong was also sold out, like in San Francisco, then we went to China, was also sold out. So it was, but we were very nervous. I don't know if everybody knows that in China, there's something called redology. There are redologists that spend devote all their life, study this one novel and become expert on everything. And there, of course, we were nervous about what that society, that circle of people would think of this. Think we totally butchered this whole novel, or are we actually did some good presentation? So there's a story of that. There was a magazine, a journal, a high-level intellectual journal on the novel, called the Cao Xueqing study. Cao Xueqing is the author. And then unbeknownst to me, every night there were scholars that came to our show and looked at it. And only the last day before we did the last show, the company that sponsored the tour told us that said, by the way, next week we're going to have a public symposium on this and to discuss your approach about this. And I was very nervous. I thought this would be the doom of any future performances of this opera in China. And I said, okay, can I come? But I was already on my schedule coming back to the US. So they said, well, they arranged, finally I get a Skype phone call. So I said 5 minutes about what the special requirements for an opera. And then each of them spoke, and I was, to my surprise, they all liked it. And they basically felt, at the beginning, they were following the story, and they would point out that they followed the novel, and that part, okay, they took liberty on that. But they said after halfway through the first act, they were caught up with the story. They don't study that anymore, and they were caught up. So I guess that was kind of seal of approval from the Radiologist Society. And there's another story. It was very interesting. My wife told me in Changsha when we had opening, and she had, good seats, comp seats in a good area in the theater. It was a beautiful newly built opera house. It was just gorgeous. Sound and look, everything was perfect. And we opened the theater. So and there was an old lady sat next to her and was crying all the way through. And so she started talking to her, and the lady told her that, my son bought this ticket for my birthday, asked me to take a look at the Dream of Red Chamber opera. And I end up crying all night. So apparently she's not an opera. She probably never, to my knowledge, prior to that, there was no opera performance ever happened in Changsha. So she probably never saw any opera, and she probably knows the story, but she was crying. So I thought that was a good sign, actually, for us, kind of to prove that our original goal was to move people of all levels of understanding of this novel. It kind of worked. And this language, that our musical language I use is it's opera, it's opera and contemporary or Chinese folk with all kind of element, Chinese classical music. I pulled all the stops I could think of to do this thing. So it's a when you do opera, actually, you could use all kind of things, because the drama requires all kinds of human emotions to the extreme, and when you're sad, to the extreme, when you're happy, to the extreme. So things like that. I think the music and the drama and the staging, I must say, the set design is just gorgeous to look at it. It's all, when Tim asked me, you got that note, David, before Tim Yip is the set designer. He was the Oscar winning of the movie he designed,
Crouching Tiger.
Crouching Tiger. So anyway, he asked us, he said, what kind of set do you like? I can do tradition, I can do modern. But I said, neoclassical. That's my music. I said, neoclassical. So new, but has traditional roots. And he designed this, is just perfect.
And just to kind of follow up on your question about that, this is not normally the sort of work that I do. So not only to translate a Chinese work for an American audience, but to then translate a Chinese classic for a Chinese audience and have it be well received, as a Chinese American, as an ABC, as someone who doesn't speak, as someone who feels like I don't know anything, and I don't, that is a wonderful reward and affirmation that, oh, maybe I'm kind of Chinese.
That's amazing. No, it really is. We've got a couple of questions about Chinese opera versions of Hong Lo Meng and to what extent they might have had an influence on you.
Okay, so there are several Chinese opera versions, and there is also in the 1930s, there is a black and white film version. I checked them all out. And I even there are new versions since the in the 19 when we were writing. So there were new Kunqu, Kun opera versions of this, also quite long. I also checked that out, and I think their version is attuned to the more to the traditional approach, Chinese opera approach to a classical. So there are in Western opera, I didn't adapt any of those ideas, and I thought important issue is in the story is the stone and the flower. They were together for 3,000 years, and then they decide to come down to earth to fulfill their human experience in love. So that I kept that part. I thought it was important in the prologue in an opera, and because that sets up the whole story. It's in the novel. It's also the first chapter of the novel. So I thought that was important, a setup. But other than that, I think mostly we were really thinking about how to make the characters grow and the drama grow. And I remember we had, David and I had this conversation with other people. We had a very different ending with Dai Yu, how she died. In the novel, in the 120th chapter version novel, she died of sickness when Bao Yu is marrying Bao Chai. That's very passive. I remember David said in the whole novel, her character is so flat that she never had any action. So we changed. I won't give away the story, but she did something for herself and made a statement when she died.
This is one of the things about this novel is that it's such an amazing novel for female characters. And there are, the women, there's so many women, they're so active, they take, they're really seen as movers of the action. And I'm wondering how is that something that, you really sort of centered on, or how do you feel that you, with obviously many fewer characters, can you convey that sort of part of the drama?
I mean, I think it's inherent, as you say, in the sort of DNA of the story. If you just sort of look at the plot, there is most of the action is driven by the female characters. Bao Yu has, a sort of strong point of view and takes a big action towards the end. But most of the sort of machinations and attempts to create a different situation for the family, those are all the female characters. So the female characters inherently have a lot of agency, which is wonderful. And so, you don't have to make that up. That's just in there. As Bright says, the one thing that I had an issue with was Dai Yu just seeming to me to be really passive. So we, tweaked that. But you just have to tell the story, the plot, and it is something wonderful about the original novel. The plot does give a lot of the action and the agency to the women.
Yeah, so in the opera, we don't have, it's mostly female. Bao Yu is the only one. And he's as a boy, so we chose a Rossini type of tenor. So he sings high, so more sound like a boy rather than, heroic Puccini type of heroic tenor. So and then all female, all the rest of 6 are female, and then the only male small character, there are 3 eunuchs coming in and out from the delivery message from the emperor. And those are 3 males all singing in together as a group. And then we also created a monk who's like a Greek chorus, is narrating in part of the story and part of not of the story. So it's like a reflection of his. He starts by, David has this great line, "Welcome to my dream." Started his first, when the music finishes, the upbeat finishes on the upbeat, and he speaks in plain English, no singing. The monk is an actor. So we end up with a story how the monk and Bao Yu unite and all that. So so there's basically most the female chorus on stage, and certain places we have male chorus on that. And then at the end of the opera, when the soldiers, the royal palace soldiers, came to arrest everybody, and then of course the male chorus was very fancy costuming, came in and did all that.
But our notion for the end there was that it's a world of women, which is destroyed by men at the end of the opera. And I think the roles for the women in the source material are strong enough that, if you're familiar with the Bechdel test, the Alison Bechdel's test about female characters, I think it passes the Bechdel test.
What I wonder if well, actually, let me go back to something else that the audience is asking, and I think it's really interesting. So you did this you toured this in China. The opera was still in English. And so did you provide Chinese subtitles?
Yeah, we do. We do that in San Francisco as well.
Oh, you do?
Bilingual subtitles, yes.
And then I know from a little background knowledge that you're thinking about doing a Chinese version of the opera as well. And so how would the Chinese version of the opera be different from the subtitles that you were showing?
Well, the subtitle is just translation by someone else. I kind of overlooked it by Joanna Lee, and she did a great translation. But my passion is one day we'll do a complete Chinese version. That includes not only the translation of the set, the words, and you rewriting some of the music, because the words, the music came from the language. If it's in English, and you can't really, that's why when you sing Mozart's opera in English or in Chinese, it feels wrong. And I did a translation years ago, Brahms' Requiem from German to Chinese. And because at the time, Chinese chorus in China was not well equipped to sing in German. So they commissioned me to write a translation. And there was a lot of problems. The German has a lot of the articles, which is on the upbeat. And then what do you do with the Chinese? Don't have upbeat articles before that. So what do you do with that note? And then you cannot sing. So there are a lot of things. So a lot of times one needs to, a translation is one thing, but it's not just a translation. And if the composer is alive, I have the liberty to rewrite. So that's a great luxury that I could have.
And do you have a time frame for when that version might come out?
Well, yeah, do we have a time frame for that?
No, we are working on a possible.
I mean, I can't really do anything for it, so.
Yeah, but we are working on a possible version, a performance in China again, another tour, and so if that happens, I think we're going to do it in Chinese, and that would be really a different, quite different, another step, because now we have the radiologists kind of agreed with us that this is okay. So I said, we're going to test the water again. Now try Chinese version.
You're ready to accept the English in Chinese translation, but once you try to mess with the Chinese, you may get in trouble.
maybe that was our fear last time. So, but I think we are ready.
So there's a question from the audience, and I actually had a very similar question. So let me just read it from the audience. Do you think that this story resonates even more due to the emotional changes, the emotional climate that we've had since the pandemic? You know, if you think about the epic stories of struggle, decline, and conflict, you think about the Ukraine war, you think about the tragedies that many people have experienced in their own lives, and tragedies then, moving on a national scale. Do you think that the opera will hit people in a different place, or means the audience will see it differently than they might have seen it in 2016?
That's so interesting. I mean, I feel like the thing that comes across most strongly in an emotional sense is the struggle of this family to survive and the conflict between love and survival. And so, yes, I mean, I hadn't really actually thought about that for myself, but now that you mention it, we all personally, to some extent, and many of us have had tragedies in our families or with our friends, and we have struggled to remain human and to hold on to what is good about ourselves and to stay connected during this period, not to mention the political turmoil in this country, the anti-Asian hate, the Ukraine, as you mentioned, and increasing conflict between the US and China. I mean, it's all, it's been rough in a lot of ways. And so to create a piece that is about trying to, the human struggle to hold on to our hearts and maintain dignity and believe in love in the midst of all these tragedies could be more powerful. We'll see.
Yeah, I think the one reason the novel is so timeless became I think it's the most important novel in the entire Chinese history. It was because it touched very basic human feelings, and like David said, to survive, to love, and to live. And they started with one of the very important elements in this novel was that it is a Taoist kind of approach to it. Is life real or it's a dream? That's what called a dream of the Red Chamber. So we end up the opera with the chorus singing, is life real or just a dream? Just the chorus, just the music just floats into the air and it finishes there. I originally I had a long note afterwards, and the opera director said, no, it's much better. It just flows off, and I think he was right. So I think that came from Zhuangzi, the grandfather of Chinese Taoism. Is he had a dream. He became a butterfly, and he woke up. He said it was that in the dream was I really became a butterfly, or actually I'm a butterfly and just think I am a human. So I think that kind of approach to this and how we take our life on earth, that kind of is profound, at the same time is relevant.
I mean, that's, I think, really a wonderful way to close this conversation. I will remind everybody that this, the Dream of the Red Chamber is being produced by the San Francisco Opera this summer, June 14th to July 3rd. I think tickets may still be available, although I don't know why they would still be available, but it just should be an amazing production. Thank you so much, David Henry Hwang, Bright Sheng, for talking to us today, for sort of letting us into your process to bring this, classic of this human classic, to to a broader audience, to the American audience, to a Western audience. And in doing so, I think, as you have both said, just sort of really remind us how human, we all are, and how that humanity is very, is the same across cultures and times and spaces. Thank you again to the China Institute for sponsoring this wonderful conversation, and for all of the excellent programming that it does throughout the year. If you go into the chat, you will see some links both for the China Institute and for the Lieberthal-Rogel Center for Chinese Studies at the University of Michigan. Some people have asked about whether there are clips or excerpts available. And I think if you go to the San Francisco Opera site, you can see some of those. And Bright, you were.
No. Yeah, I just want to add, don't we have a link to have discounted ticket sales?
I know we were talking about that. The San Francisco Opera said that they might be able to provide one.
Maybe we can post that in our website in the after this.
Yes.
Interested.
And I think we were also talking about, we have the registration for people who signed up for the webinar, and so that link might be able to go straight out to their emails. So,
and thank you, Anne. Great moderating.
Oh, no, thank you so much. This has been such a pleasure. And thank you to all this amazing audience for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.